We've got to start with Justin Trudeau, and people rightly dislike this man a lot. They hate him because he hates Canada and he hates its citizens. He would much rather the Canadian citizens hand over their house, give their car keys or, their electric scooters over to whichever immigrant is nearest and just roll over and die. Thank you very much. That's how much Trudeau hates Canada and its citizens. And now the citizens are showing him how much that's reciprocated, that hatred he's got. And so it's hard to hear what he has to say. The first 30 seconds here, he's talking about how many people Canada brings in permanent residents, 500,000 a year. And he says, we need that to make sure the economy can keep going. That's what his excuse for having those immigrants, temporary workers, the 500,000, 500,000 people coming in. We need that to keep the economy stable, he says. And then he says,
however, over the past few years, we've seen a massive spike in temporary immigration, whether it's temporary foreign workers or whether it's international students in particular that have grown at a rate far beyond what Canada has been able to absorb. To give an example, in 2017, 2% of Canada's population was made up of temporary immigrants. Now, we're at 7.5% of our population comprised of temporary immigrants.
So in 2017, I know it's hard to listen to. We're not gonna listen to any more of that. In 2017, 2%, I think he said 2%, maybe 2.5, 2% was temporary immigrants. Now it's 7.5%. What do you think happens to a country when almost 10% of the population doesn't care about the country because, they'll move on to the next country, maybe the United States, maybe somewhere over in Asia, maybe somewhere else. Who cares, right? And who cares about this place? This place, the real estate's too expensive, the food's too expensive, and, the people, what can you say about Canadian people, right? We don't have any kind of culture or anything like that. Not that's on display in our country because we're not allowed, because Justin Trudeau hates Canada. And he would rather, again, have us replaced with, did you see the Junos? Noel was talking about this on the Kitchen Table Talk, this past Kitchen Table Talk. And he was saying we went to the Junos and we didn't realize we were in Canada. It seemed like we were watching some kind of Indian show or something like that. And I don't mean Indian First Nations, I mean India across the pond, India, right? So very, very jarring. Right? But it's all part and parcel of how much this government, and every level of the government hates Canadians. And it's a darn shame. I wish it weren't so, but their actions are unmistakable. Here's Amir Hart. He says he's a PPC conditional candidate. He says Trudeau has finally admitted mass immigration is a disaster. Remember when Andrew Scheer, Singh and Elizabeth May accused Bernier of being xenophobic for being correct. The Liberals, Conservatives, NDP and Greens are responsible for this disaster. The PPC has always been correct about immigration. Yep. In 2019, I was called racist by people in Guelph for holding the position that we should not do this because it's economically a disaster waiting to happen. And then when the disaster happened, everybody just grinned and bared it like it wasn't happening. And now that it's continuing to happen, everybody's kind of angry. But I mean, it really doesn't have much of an effect. I would have rather done something about it in 2019. But in 2019, we were making an economic argument against immigration the way it was happening. And we're roundly made fun of and called names and all sorts of crazy stuff, maligned in the press, accused of almost thought crime, right? Before we had thought crime-ish. And we're protested by Antifa. It's all about control, of course. But PPC was always right. And this is 4 clips of these debates, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to just close that off because it's going to start talking. Here in the UK, they hate the British as well, and they want to replace the population. So yesterday I showed you 2 Indian guys trying to steal a council house from the people who lived there. They were trying to evict them, and the people who lived there said no and give them the keys back and you're getting out of here. And so here's what's going on in England. So this is crazy. This is wild stuff. It's 1:24. I think it's probably worth watching the whole thing. And here we go. Wall Street Silver says, homeowners in the UK have been told that compulsory selling of their home will be enforced to house illegal migrants. Elderly people are being told their houses are too big for them and they need to sell. And so like compulsory sale is like, you're going to sell now because we're telling you to. Start packing your stuff or I'll pack it. Here we go.
Where are we going to put these people? The uncomfortable truth, as far as I can see it, is that we are going to have tent cities of asylum seekers popping up around the UK.
Well, I think you summed it up beautifully, Patrick, just the huge pressure that we're seeing now on accommodation, and that does seem to be the only answer. But I'm actually a little bit more worried than that, because I think this is all getting very sinister now. We know that we've had people who have been told that their properties are going to be compulsory purchased for asylum seekers. That pretty much tears up private property rights in this country. I was listening to the radio on the way here, and they were talking about a massive problem facing Britain, which was older people living in houses that were, quote, too big for them. Who's got a right to tell you your house is too big for you? You should be allowed to live where you darn well like. And the implication was very clear. These elderly people are taking houses that they shouldn't have. And I fear that's a worry, that there'll be some kind of move to get them out of those houses. We've also had the horrible scenario last week when Matthew Parris, writing in The Times, talked about how euthanasia wouldn't be a bad thing if it encouraged elderly people to hasten their own deaths. So what? We've got to pop our clogs, have we, forcibly, when we're 60, 70, 80, 90, perhaps earlier, if we're not productive people in society, as Matthew Parris said it. So I think the whole thing now is getting really, really sinister and scary.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Because we're funding it with our tax dollars. And it's not too far a leap. As Bernier said in 2019, economically, this is a disaster waiting to happen. These guys are talking about economically, we're looking at tent cities, where are we going to house these people? And she says, well, we could kill the elderly that live in the homes that are being taken up because they're not being very productive. And she was paraphrasing the argument being made by her government, compulsory sales or MAID, which is just what's happening here, right? And so why do you think that the governments around the world want to wholesale replace their population, especially one specific group in their population? Why do you think that is, right? The elderly are predominantly what skin color? And everybody wants to focus on skin color, so it just bears mentioning, right? So how does that play out? And why are people tolerating this? Why are people scrambling as if this is something that they cannot say no to? Can we not say no to this? Can we not turn this back? It seems crazy that we don't have control of our own government, right? Here's Mr. Poilievre, and he's highlighting this RBC report. Breaking new numbers out today show record housing costs after 8 years of Trudeau. Photo ops announcements and government spending don't build homes. He doesn't discuss immigration. And if you don't discuss immigration, you're not going to solve this problem. He's said it a couple of times, but man, it should be the cornerstone of the things he's saying, because if you ignore that, building homes, fine, sure, great. Let's be innovative and let's talk about giving people free land, right? And encouraging babies in Canada and encouraging family growth, encouraging family generally, right? We could do that, and we could have communities that are really, really strong. But instead, he focuses on building homes. And I think that that's folly, because the building homes seems like it's going to go to foreigners, right? Temporary or permanent, whatever, but not Canadian citizens who grew up in this country and built this country, right? And sure, my parents are immigrants. They helped build this country too, right? But I think that people who grew up here, my dad got here when he was young enough to go to school in Canada. And so it's interesting to me. I'm not trying to exclude immigrants who came here the right way, although there are people out there who really don't like immigrants at all. And I'm a first generation Canadian. So I think that a little bit of immigration for people who are, at one point, I think Canada had the gold standard of immigration. But then we started flooding the country with anybody and everybody, just like all of the Western countries. And that kind of got screwed up. But I think if you bring people into the country who can help the country, that's a net plus for your country. But I think that the other side of it needs to be talked about too. If you empty a country of all its movers and shakers, then you're doing a disservice to that country. So I think that immigration should be allowed, but on a much lower level than what we were allowing before. And before, I'm talking like 100,000 people a year type deal. And I mean, I remember Guelph. Guelph's a crazy place. I remember going to the Cornerstone one day, and they had a big party going on. And I mean, there was always a party going on downtown Guelph back when I was 20. And so I walked up and I was kind of like, had a beer, looking around, what's going on? And it was a party to prevent somebody's boyfriend from being deported. And I was like, oh man, I'm gonna finish this beer and go somewhere else. You're not gonna like my opinion on this. So it is what it is, right? And I think that there could be a place, like if you lived here and you wanted to go to Japan and you could contribute to Japan, I think that that's fine. But if you wanted to bring the whole city of Guelph or the whole province of Ontario to Japan because, you know, those Japanese don't know what they're doing, that's a problem, right? Or if you're in Canada and you say, you know, these Canadians are real lazy, let's bring in a whole bunch of this other group of people. That's bad. Isn't that genocide? So, right, like there's a balance. There's a balance is all I'm saying. Okay. Anita and Ann says, with Budget 24, we're working to continue to build more homes faster by topping up the Housing Accelerator Fund, launching a new $6 billion Canadian Housing Infrastructure Fund, because every Canadian deserves a fair chance to own a home. Bull poop. It's exactly the same as what Poilievre's promising, right? Like, look, we're going to build homes. And the Liberals say, look, we're going to build homes. And I'm saying, holy cow, you're totally missing the problem. You guys created this problem and you're purposely not talking about it. There's a giant elephant. It's sitting on your face and you're ignoring it. What is going on? Carl says, I was going to say you're sitting on your toe, but it's more than your toe. And like, I don't know. I think that like it's backed up. And anyway, Carl Benjamin, he's a comedian guy, and he's responding to Alex Holmes. Alex Holmes says foreign nationals account for only 8% of new social housing rentals in the United Kingdom. A foreign national is far more likely to be building a new council house than getting one. In London, for example, foreign nationals account for 40% of the construction of buildings workforce. Carl Benjamin says, why should foreign nationals ever be entitled to social housing? It just doesn't make sense that someone born and raised abroad can get the British taxpayer to pay for them to live in the United Kingdom. When my parents came here, there wasn't a handout. It was just, if you worked hard, you could get ahead in Canada, and you can, or you could. Now, if you work hard, you get to pay money for people to grift carbon taxes off you. So it's ridiculous. So like, why work hard, right? Like, what's the purpose of working hard? So people can take half your money? Screw that. And he's right. Like, I think that if you're in a situation where you show up in a country and you're like, I'm here, and you are a net negative on the country should have a mechanism to say, hey, when you arrived, you said you were going to produce X and you didn't produce X. And so now you got to leave. See you later. This nice gentleman will escort you to the plane. And we've already deducted, or here's the invoice for your plane ticket, and you'll sit in the airport until it's paid, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You should be removed. There should be some kind of mechanism, not, oh, you're on hard times. Like, and if you pay into the systems that are meant to take care of Canadians, then deporting somebody who's paid into that, blah, 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 right? Like, fairness is kind of my main point. And I think if you're treated fairly, then, and you behave in a reciprocal manner, then things will go fairly well. But if you show up and you're a mooch, then get out. But if you show up and you try real hard, and then like shit happens, like the government shuts down the economy, that's not your fault. You know what I'm saying? So there's all sorts of caveats, but fundamentally, it feels like we're not being treated fairly by anybody with regards to everything. And with regards to housing, cost of living, housing and cost of living are kind of similar, but food, gas, energy, all that stuff. With regards to the benefits that newcomers get versus people who've paid into Canada their whole lives, all of that kind of stuff. Fair. They're wiping their butts with fair and laughing at us while they do it. And it's ridiculous. And I mean, and trying to articulate, we could get a fair deal is frustrating, because people will then say, well, you're taking, just like the argument right now, well, you're taking away money from the people who are getting the carbon tax rebates by removing the rebates and the tax. And well, I guess they better get to work then, eh? Because we should reward work, and we should not reward grifting and laziness and pretending to virtue signal about the environment. CBC Watcher says, let's talk about carbon taxes. Poilievre calls for a first minister's meeting on the carbon tax, and shockingly, Delacourt agrees. But at this point, what does Trudeau have to lose? Only after name-dropping Wary, Mansbridge, Hebert, and their pollster Bruce Anderson. So the Hamilton Spectator says Trudeau is facing an all-out carbon levy revolt. There is a way to fight back. So people are starting to realize how much damage this is doing. Well, and Trudeau's starting to realize that people are done listening to his nonsense, and so they're pushing back, I suppose. Here is Drea Humphreys asking Pierre Poilievre what he's going to do about the Paris Agreement, 137. And so here we go.
Humphrey with Rebel News. You've made it very clear if you form government, you will axe the carbon tax. But will you also withdraw us from the underlying United Nations Paris Accord agreement, which allows us to be unfairly taxed on our emissions while giving China a pass?
Well, we will not be unfairly taxed on our emissions, and I will not give China or any other country a pass. We will reduce emissions and costs, but our approach is completely different than Trudeau's.
So he's dodging the whole Paris Accord thing. And he's saying China won't get a pass, but her point was the Paris Accord gives China a pass. Canada has to pay for carbon. China's building coal plants. That was the question. He knew it. He's not stupid. He knew it. And he very purposely tore off little bits of what she said, responded to those little bits, taken out of context and merged into the question that he wanted to ask, right? In politics, never answer the question, only answer the question you want to ask, right? And rephrase it so it is the question you want to ask. Or sometimes they'll thank you for the question and then rephrase, this is what I want to talk about, and then answer that, right? And they just walk you away from it. But he's really trying hard to sound like he's answering the question, but he's not. He's just carving off little bits to respond, right? So it's expert. It's expert. That's what he is intending, is to make you feel like he's answering the question, but he's not.
His approach is taxes. Mine is technology. His approach is to raise the cost of traditional energy that we still need. My approach is to lower the cost of alternatives. His approach is to put up stop signs in front of our workers. My approach is to green light green projects. We need a massive abundance of clean, green, emissions-free energy by
Paris Agreement. He is on board with the Paris Agreement. Green technology, just like a Rive scam, it's a fake. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't do what it's promised to do. It's a government slush fund of money with zero accountability. Oh man, we've got a solar farm. Oh well, the hail destroyed the solar farm, but we still got this $1 billion sitting here, right? Like, it's a slush fund of money, no accountability, and we're not getting green energy from it. All we're getting is our tax dollars being spent.
By giving fast permits and responsible permits for hydro dams, nuclear power, carbon capture and storage, offshore tidal wave power. These are the kinds of power sources that
tidal wave power. I love communities that are powered on tidal wave power. Where are they again, Mr. Poilievre?
I will bring home by granting quick but responsible approval so that they can go ahead. That will mean abundant, affordable, clean energy that brings down emissions and the cost of living.
What are the first 6 nuclear power plants that are going to be built in Alberta? Yeah. Oh, that's not going to happen for 40 years? Okay. Because that's what Danielle Smith said like 3 months ago. Right? Because there's no projects underway, and building a nuclear power plant takes a decade or more, probably 40 years. Which one? The one in Ontario, in Grey County, Ontario. How long did that thing take? And then they decommissioned a bunch of things, and then they recommissioned it because it's super controversial for whatever reason. And he's gonna fast track the approvals, is he? Yeah, that's gonna happen. Sure, that's gonna happen. Along with the tidal power, right? Maxime Bernier is responding to this nonsense as well. He says, instead of having a carbon tax, Poilievre will fund other programs to reduce emissions and reach the Paris Accord targets that he supports. Don't be fooled. His goal is the same as Trudeau, but with different ways to tax you and spend on useless climate programs. It's a green grift. It's nonsense. The only way to solve these problems, stop immigration, and reduce the cost of everything to as close to zero as possible by removing taxation and reducing services until we get to a point where the service is actually being delivered. If I tell you, I'm going to give you the best healthcare and the best education in the world, and then I offered you Canadian healthcare and education, would you disagree? Would you agree that I misrepresented the offer? And would you agree that we're paying too much for the healthcare? Because it's not really healthcare. You get to sit in the hallway, right? You get to die on a waiting list. And it's not really education. It's an indoctrination camp. So instead, cut those crap services because we're not delivering them anyway, and then build up from the ground up. Here's your tax dollars, and we've got doctors, we've got nurses, and maybe the government will help structure some kind of something to allow these people to deliver their services in a way that is acceptable to everybody, but where the government doesn't have their finger in the pie. Because it seems like the government, how many hospitals do you know that, well, the structure of the administration of the hospital is the bottom paid hospital administrator is getting like $380,000 a year, and the top paid nurse is getting around the same. So what? How does that make sense? The people who are delivering care are getting paid crap, and the administrators are being paid a crap ton. They don't have any medical experience, and they're making decisions about care. And no thanks. No thanks. Burn the systems to the ground because they don't work, and give people their own money in their own pockets, and then we'll see where we're at. Jeepers creepers. Here's CTV. This is Vasi Kapoulas giving an absolutely, here Danielle Smith is wearing the red dress, but it's Vasi Kapoulas that sounds exactly like Chrystia Freeland. Here we go.
Do you have evidence to support the idea or the characterization you're using that it's arbitrary? Because the federal government is aligning its targets with much of the rest of the world that has signed on to agreements, for example, through the UN about what the overall targets are by 2030, by 2035, and by 2050. And what they talk about is often, reaching those targets in order to stop the warming that's happening. That is increasing the frequency with which we are seeing the impacts of climate change. So fires, let's say, man-made in many instances, but taking up a wider swath of land that Albertans will be very familiar with and happening more frequently. In your last budget, expenses are up $2.1 billion from the previous year, largely due to $2.9 billion earmarked to deal with droughts, wildfires, and floods. There is a cost of inaction around climate change as well, and I think the federal government would argue that means that their their targets are not arbitrary.
Well, I guess I would say is paying a carbon tax at the pump going to stop the fires in our province? And the answer is no. What stops the fires is, number one, education, because 60% of them are human caused. Number two, building fire breaks so that we can protect communities. Number three, investing in water bomb equipment like de Havilland so that we can fight fires. Number four, sharing resources with the rest of the country through the Canadian Forest Fire Association. So I think the cause and effect are very different. You have to be able to deal with crises as they happen. So I'm watching to see with some evidence that the carbon tax is changing behavior. I just haven't seen it yet.
But the point is for it to do so over a long period of time, not immediately, right? That's the point of incentivizing the behaviors. And to separate the idea that reducing emissions does mitigate the impact of climate change from fighting fires. Of course, you have to do adaptation, as we were discussing, but that becomes more expensive if they happen more frequently. And though they are human caused, the frequency and the scope of them are a direct impact of climate change.
Do you hear that? Vasi knows. Vasi knows that these fires are a direct impact of climate change. And so we have to mitigate it using this tax because it's supposed to change behavior over time. Don't you understand? I understand. I understand that these people are trying to use taxes to change behavior, to reduce emissions, all for control. It has nothing to do, the fires are arson. It has nothing to do with changing the weather. It has everything to do with control. And it's incredible that Vasi Kapoulas, using her CTV position, lends credibility to this lie, even though people say, oh, scientists agree. Scientists at this point are agreeing that men can be a woman. And governments are saying, and if you say it different, we're going to arrest you. So science is a little suspect, if you ask me. I'll let Danielle Smith respond to Vasi Kapoulas here.
We will always have fires. We will always have floods. We will always have ice storms. And the job of government is to make sure that we mitigate, that we are prepared for when they happen, and that we have the resources available to do it. I can't, you have to make sure that you're budgeting for both of those things. And so that's why we have a plan to be carbon neutral by 2050. But I just don't think that we punish people in the meantime. Let's build out the hydrogen infrastructure, build out the electrical infrastructure, make sure that we've got enough vehicles available for people to buy.
We don't have any politicians in Canada that are speaking honest truth to people. Honestly, there's no, this green thing, hydrogen, it's not happening. They're going to try and make it happen, but idiocy, absolute idiocy. it is expensive, and I don't think that it's as safe as gasoline, although I don't know. I've talked to some engineers and people who, chemical engineers who work with chemical, and you have to increase the capacity of the containers to deal with the pressure needed for the hydrogen because it has to be stored at a higher pressure to keep it liquid. And so that's why I think that it's less safe. But there's all sorts of things that could go wrong. Could it work just like our gas cars? Probably, but say in the same way that the Tesla cars work, just like our cars work. Like they kind of work, but you don't want to get into a car accident with a Tesla because those things go up in flames and they don't stop burning. So there's lots of problems. There's lots of problems that they're not telling us. And they're using a lot of language that leads you to believe that they know what they're talking about. Vasikopoulos, Premier Smith, all these people are using language that is meant to make you believe that they know what they're talking about, that they've got some kind of inside track, but they do not. They do not. Tidal power things, like tidal, what is it? Windmills that power something? Where is this? How many homes are powered by this? Is it predictable? Is it? Because tides work more often than the wind. Have we rolled this out? Is he just making crap up? It seems like he's just making crap up. The last thing, they were trying to put these things in the English Channel, and the tides ripped them all out, and they weren't practical, and they couldn't, because the sand, like the ground was too soft to mount them properly, and it just ripped them out, right? So like, and then there's the problem of delivering the electricity through underwater cables to dry land, and then distribution there. Like there's loss in the cabling from the actual source of the power, and then there's loss in the distribution. How much is this practical? It just doesn't seem practical to me. Like this is the back of a napkin on my brain. Come on. Danielle Smith says, the carbon tax is a shell game used to tax and transfer money to areas where the prime minister needs more votes. It does not help the environment or reduce emissions. Wow, at least she knows that. This was April 2nd, yesterday. She posted this, and I showed this to you yesterday. Quebec is paying less of a carbon tax than the rest of the country. Shocking. I'm not shocked. Here is, and we're going to talk about police, and this is scary stuff. What's going on is the police are being deployed against peaceful protesters in Calgary. Reminds me of the Freedom Convoy. So Rachel says, carbon tax protester Laura says she came out because people are having difficulty to pay for rent and groceries. 21 seconds. Here we go.
I came out here today because people are having trouble buying food and paying rent and paying for their mortgages. We're being taxed again, and more people are falling behind. They can't keep up. I'm standing here for the people who can't be here because we deserve to have our rights to peacefully protest.
At the end there with the motor, she says, we deserve to have our rights to peacefully protest. I think that she's accurate. I think that that's true. Here is the Keith Wilson. He's a lawyer. He was at the Rouleau hearings. Angelica says, abundance of RCMP vehicles are lined up down the road from the carbon tax protest. So scary stuff. This is because Mayor Gondek is allowing the police. Oh, here we go. 2 years ago, says Without Papers Pizza, Mayor Gondek made public protest unlawful in Calgary unless approved by her. A gathering opposing now illegal mandates took place in a park where an independent journalist was charged with assaulting a cop. Did he assault the cop? Why did that cop punch him? So this is a minute. We're not going to watch that for right now, but here is Mark Friesen, and he's sharing Mocha's report. RCMP deploy 100+ officers in riot gear, some with automatic weapons, near a gas station outside of Calgary, Alberta, where peaceful protesters against the carbon tax is taking place. So here it is, and people were saying that these guys are covering their badges as well.
Police involvement here at this level, this could elicit an even bigger response like what we saw at Milk River. Is that what they want? I think they all need to call in sick, take COVID tests, and shut her down and say, I can't make it into work today.
Did you used to have faith in police?
Not really, but now it's really bad because they have tarnished the badge. Like I have no respect for them anymore. They should have stood down in Ottawa, but they didn't. So right now what they're doing, they're working for their corporation instead of taking care of we the people.
Yep, they don't work for us.
So they're not taking.
They work for somebody else, and so that's very, very concerning. Daisy says heavily armed police in Alberta have lined up this morning against peaceful Canadian protesters protesting the carbon tax. Again, I don't know if this is the same. Oh, this is Alberta. And then we've got Son of a Gunner says, is responding to Drizzle. Drizzle says, these officers were told yesterday at a carbon protest to remove their badge numbers. I wonder why. So is that the badge there, the K146, or is that something else? I think that's something else, but Son of a Gunner says, what's the legal aspect of a cop removing or hiding a badge? Are they any different from gangbangers that carry guns? What differentiates them from a Gabrielle Wortman? And should they be taken seriously? And Canadian Greyman says, when the RCMP do not have their badge numbers and names, they are no longer considered police officers by a court of law. RCMP should tread lightly for deliberately obfuscating officer identification, especially after the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission findings. So they don't seem to care about that kind of stuff, right? And Liquid 200 or Liquid Zoo is forwarding this. I saw this post and I wanted to get multiple because sometimes they don't appear. Like sometimes I save it and it just goes bad for whatever reason. It happens. It's probably a user error, but I got multiple. But Jeremy Mackenzie, somebody had taken a screenshot of Jeremy Mackenzie's own post on this and I couldn't find it, but I didn't look very hard. So it's probably still there, but I just didn't look. But Liquid 200 or Liquid Zoo says, the Premier of Nova Scotia, who had Morgan and I, this is Jeremy Mackenzie saying, the Premier of Nova Scotia, who had Morgan, his girlfriend, and I arrested and charged for questioning his authority, now has his private security very poorly following us around amidst a developing court case where he is implicated in crimes. This is also the same province where law enforcement legitimacy is ambiguous at best, burying and destroying evidence, fabricating evidence. Portapique witness committing suicide, Bell Communications servers storing emergency calls being wiped out, and so on. If anything happens to Morgan or I, it was not any accident or suicide. Videos, photos, and statements have been provided to lawyers and distributed to others for safekeeping. If I see these men following us again, I consider it a threat to mine and Morgan's personal safety and will react accordingly. So the police are not working for us. In Toronto, this is somewhere, I don't know. I think it's Toronto. Oh, maybe not. YEG. Is that Toronto? Officers were seen on the scene. Maybe this is Edmonton. Officers were seen on the scene of an alleged stabbing incident at Jasper Place Transit Center. Initial information suggests that there were three individuals. Three individuals are suspected to have been involved in the altercation, which reportedly resulted in stabbings. Per information in our DM from followers at the scene, 4 people were arrested at the scene. Video footage captured at the scene shows a significant police presence with around 10 officers, some were armed with ARs, pistols, and tasers, apprehending one of the individuals believed to be involved in the stabbing. So it's a takedown, but the reason I wanted to show it to you, the reason I wanted to show it to you is all of these police resources are being utilized, and sure, like this is what I would expect police officers to be doing with criminals, but in Alberta, the police are deployed against peaceful protesters. Right here, it's a stabbing, and look at the resources. It just seems like a very different Canada than the one I grew up in. And it's not good. It's not very good. Here's Paul Mitchell. He says, hilarious. Alberta Danielle Smith comments on the Trudeau Liberals' total failure with their gun buyback program targeting legal firearm owners. She says, well, I call that a success that they haven't been able to seize a single gun. So here, we'll just listen to her.
Well, I call that a success that they haven't been able to seize a single law-abiding firearms owner's gun. So I wish them continued success at being able to achieve zero compliance with their program, and we are not going to do anything to help them.
And also F them, just for good measure. So the police aren't working for us. The carbon tax, even the good premiers, Premier Smith, and do you think Premier Smith's a good premier, or is she the same kind of globalist, right? The same kind as maybe Mr. Poilievre, who is not willing to leave the Paris Accord, but is willing to say, yeah, well, the carbon tax isn't a way to get it done. So we're still going to have to deal with these carbon taxes because nobody has the courage to say this is bunk. All of these people don't work for us. Like, they all are working for other interests against what the citizens want. And that's not a situation that we should be in. We should be able to correct that situation, in my opinion. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful